Welcome to the Maker Supplies workshop. We are proud that we today can present our latest CNC machine. It's going to be a full-size machine. Now we just built like a small one, which is good for showing how it works, and also we will demonstrate how to assemble it. But you should envision 1.5 meter on the X and 2.75 meter on Y. The machine is a result of a student work where we worked together with a couple of students, and now Rasmus has finished up the design, and here we have the complete version. It is a ball screw on the C-axis and the X-axis, and on the Y-axis we have rack and pinion via some planetary gearboxes, which increase both the torque as well as the resolution on the Y-axis. I will take you on a small tour of some of the details of the machine. So here we have the X-axis drive. You can see the motor, the linear guides and the ball screw connecting to the XZ gantry. And you will notice that we have added 2 plates on XZ gantry, which makes it easier to assemble and also to make adjustments so the router spindle get completely vertical. If we take a look on the Z-axis, we have the stepper motor on top, and this is essentially our linear actuator with a ball screw, and you can see the ball nut right here connecting to the XZ plates. And then finally we have the rack and pinion drive with the planetary gearboxes. You see the motor, you see the planetary gearbox that allows adjustments up and down, so you get a good connection to the rack, between the rack and the pinion. And we can try to see if we can find the pinion in here. Here you see it, and let's see how it moves. And you should envision this being 2.75 meters. I will now hand over the scene to Rasmus, who will show you how to assemble the machine, and in between us you will have a short view on how the machine moves during a cut.
So, before we start, I have to say that this is a smaller machine that you will be assembling, and it is only 1 by 1 meter, so yours will be considerably larger than this. Also, this machine has been assembled before, and we have disassembled it for this video, so some parts will be partially assembled, but we will show all of the processes, of course. So we are starting on page 1, and we have to start inserting the screws and thread them onto the T-nuts on the linear guides. So I'll start it out by laying it on the side of the table like this, and then I'll grab my screws and also my T-nuts, and then I like to put the screw on the screwdriver like this and put it through, and then just make it grab the first thread or 2 of the T-nut. So it's very important to not screw it in too much, because then it will make it easier to slide it onto the seat, to the profile afterwards. This is one linear guide with the screws and the T-nuts, and you should of course do it with all of the profiles. Now I'll move on to the racks. So again, I have a rack with the screws already inserted. And I'll just do the same thing for this other one. And again, you should do the same thing for all of the racks. So now we are ready to put them onto the C-beam. So I find it possible to slide it on like this. And I'll just use my 2 fingers here to align all of the T-nuts. Now I'm ready to align the linear guide with the C-beam, so I'll use my alignment tool here, and then I'll slide it into the tracks here. And when doing this, I like to just fasten the linear guide in one end. So in this case I'm gonna align it over here, but I have just tightened one screw in the other end. And that's just to make sure that the linear guide doesn't move this way. So I'll start out by tightening my alignment tool. And then I'll press the linear guide against the alignment tool like this so it can move back and forth. Now I can tighten this. And first off, I'll just move the alignment tool to the next screw. And also we can at this point now loosen the other end that we tightened before. And now I'm ready to move the alignment tool. And now I'll just skip one screw. And we can keep doing this for the rest of the tightening process. Now I'll skip 2 screws. And this is just because as we tighten more and more of this linear guide, it's gonna get more and more stiff along the length, so we don't have to use the alignment tool for each screw. And I like to just keep skipping 2 screws for the rest of the length of the linear guide. Now we're ready to slide on the racks on the C-beam, just as we did with the linear guides. And we're doing 2 shorter racks, just so we can align them to each other, just to show the process. So we're going to use the spacing tool, and we'll put it in between the linear guide and the rack. and I'll just put it just beside the screw, and then I'll tighten this screw. I'll move the spacing tool onto the next screw. And I'll keep doing this. Now we have to do the joint between the two racks, and I'll align them with this piece of rack. I'll just press them firmly together. I'll move my spacing tool onto the next screw. Now holding everything tight, I'm ready to tighten the screw. So now that we've fixed the rack to the C-beam, we are ready to test if the distance between the rack and the linear guide is the same at all places. So this joint is very critical for smooth operation, so I'll start measuring at these 2 points. So I can measure with a digital caliper. I can measure from the top of the teeth to the linear guide over here. And then I'll measure on the other side. And I can also measure on the middle of this rack, for example, and I can just keep doing this. So when measuring the distance, you should try to achieve a difference in distance between the rack teeth and the linear guide of less than 1/10 of a millimeter. Total difference. Now I've also assembled the second y-axis, and these should be assembled in exactly the same way. The z-axis is of course much shorter than the x-axis, but they will be assembled the same way. So you should note that the linear guide should be installed on this face of the C-beam, and that goes for both the z and the x-axis. And also they will have a distance in the end where you have to space the linear guide away from the end of the C-beam. So we'll start by taking the linear guide. Now I can adjust the distance between the end of the C-beam and the linear guides here. And I like to just tighten the linear guide in this end, just to keep the spacing correct. Now I'll insert the alignment tool on the C-beam. I'll move on to the next screw. And now, just as I did on the y-axis, I'll just skip the next screw. So for the Z and for the x-axis, I'll let one of the linear guides be loose. So this can still be adjusted, though I did tighten this screw to keep this distance the same. So this should also be the same for the x-axis, it will have one loose linear guide. So now I've also done the x-axis, and you can see in the same way, this has a loose linear guide, and this linear guide is also loose for later adjustment. And I adjusted the distance over here, and I have also adjusted the distance over here. Now we are ready to put the linear guide blocks onto the linear guides. So I have unpacked all of the linear guide blocks, and I have inserted this grease zerk into the end of it, and now we're going to slide it onto the linear guides. Now when handling these, it's very important to keep the plastic piece inside of them at all times when they are not on the linear guide. Otherwise you risk these balls falling out of the linear guide block. So we'll start by putting them on the Z-axis. And on the Z-axis, these grease zerks will have to point away from each other. For the X-axis, the linear guide blocks with the grease zerks will have to point towards each other. And for the Y-axis again, they will have to be pointing away from each other. So now all of the linear guide blocks have been inserted onto the linear guide. So now we are on page 2. And what I like to do is just assemble these brackets with the screws and the T-nuts first. So I'll grab the screws, just like I did with the linear guides. And I'll insert them into the T-nuts, just for 1 or 2 threads. Now I can slide it into the 2040 profile here. And there are 2 sides to this. So there's one where they are very close to the edge and one where they are further away from the edge. And the side where they are further away from the edge is the one that's going to connect to the 2040. Now I'm just going to tighten one of the screws. So on this short machine, there's only 4 of these profiles in total. So we'll take 2 of them for the front and the back profile, which you will also have to do, but you will have a higher number of profiles for the middle part of the machine. Now I'm moving on to this end plate. The way I like to assemble this is to put the screws in, like this. And then I'll again just thread them once or twice into the T-nuts. So now I've put the screws in all of the end plates, and they of course come in pairs because of the laser engraving. So now we are ready to assemble the frame. So I'll move the C-beam over here. And this is actually going to be put upside down, which can be the easiest in some situations. Then I'll take these cross beams. I'll slide them in like this. And I'm ready to do the next one. And with the frame assembled like this, you just tighten up the screws. Just one on each side here. And when I do this, I want to try to align it so they are more square than they were before. Now we're ready to slide 2 T-nuts into the top grooves of one of these y-axes, and it's going to be the one on the right side, but there's not necessarily one of these that's the right or the left side. I'm going to flip it like this afterwards, so I'm going to call this my right side, so I'm going to install the 2 T-nuts like this. Now we can put on the end plates. And when putting these on, it's the easiest to put in all of the screws loosely and then tighten them in the end. And when tightening, we want to make sure that these back faces are somewhat parallel. Now we can take the front and back profiles and we'll slide them into the T-nuts like this. So I'll use my fingers to align them again. So now it's time to flip the machine, and to do that we'll just tighten up one screw in each corner. And I can flip this by myself, but when you have a 3-meter long machine, it's a good idea to be 2 people to flip it. So on this table with this small machine, I wanted to sit in this direction, because then later I can access these screws underneath. But on the longer machine you will likely have another setup, but you will have to access these screws. So for now we'll just we have the right side here where all of the screws are tightened underneath, and I will just loosen up this side. So I'll loosen all of the screws here. So now this side is able to move compared to the other side. Now we are starting on page 3 and we'll install the side plates onto the linear guide blocks here and over there on the y-axis. So we have to remember what the right and the left side is, and in my case this is the right side of my machine because I have these 2 T-nuts in here. Now we'll do the same for the other side. Now I'll just put something here to put the x-axis on while I tighten it in the other side. I'll just put this screw in, and then I can do the same on this side. Now I can remove this box. Now, the distance between the y-axes has not yet been adjusted, but that's why we loosened all of the screws on this side. Because now I'm able to push it in a little bit, so that it can follow the width of the C-beam up here. So now I'm able to tighten these screws. And now, because this side of the frame has not yet been tightened, when I tighten these screws on the x-axis, the whole frame will align itself. Now I'll just make sure that I can slide this profile back and forth. And I see that I can do that now. So now I'm ready to pull the x-axis all the way to the front. And now the x-axis is what defines this distance. So the frame is able to move and the x-axis can align it. So now I'll just center this and I'll tighten up these screws. Now I'll do the same thing for the back profile. Again, the width of the gantry will adjust the distance here. So I'll just make sure that I can move this back and forth. And then I'll center it. Now I'll tighten the screws. Now I'm ready to adjust the distance between these. The way I like to calculate it is to take the length of the C-beam, which in this case is 1000 millimeters, and then I'll deduct the width of all of these in total. So we have 4 of these and they are 20 each, so that's 80. So we'll deduct 80 from 1000, so that's 920, and then we'll divide it by 3 to get this spacing. So now I'll adjust this distance. To do this, I'll first move the gantry so that it sits above the profile. So now that will adjust the distance between these two rails. Now I have to loosen all of the screws in each end. And when I tighten this, I want to push up on the profile so that it sits against the CD. And again, I'll push the profile up against the CD. So at this point you can just keep going. You can move the gantry to the next profile and tighten this and keep going for all of them. Now we're ready for page 4. We'll prepare this ball screw for installation. We'll start out by taking the bracket and sliding it on like this. Now I'm able to put the bearing block on, and it should point in this direction. And now I'll put the preload nut on. And when tightening this tension nut, what I like to do is just grab the ball screw with some paper and then tighten it like this. And now you can see that both of the ball screws are assembled and we're ready to move on. We're moving on to page 5 now, and we will start by mounting the switch to this bracket. Depending on how you want to do your wiring, you can put the cable through like this. I will put the next switch over here. So now I'll put the bearing block onto the ball screw and I'll slide the screws in. I can slide this face on. And I'll put these screws in. Now I'm ready to put it up onto the gantry. So to do this, I'll move the blocks over here and space them apart a little bit. And then I'll just make sure that my ball screw nut is roughly in the same position, because it has to go in between the linear guide blocks. And now I'll guide ball screw in like this. Now I'll just thread these screws in. And for these screws it's very good to use a ball end screwdriver. So now we are moving on to page 6 and we'll install the X plate onto these linear guide blocks. So in our case, this is the fixed linear guide and this is the loose linear guide. So we'll tighten up the lower screws. Now I'll tighten up one screw over here to define this distance. And now I'll insert the screws for the ball nut block. Now I can move this axis all the way over here. And now I'm ready to tighten up the linear guide. So I'll start by tightening this screw. And now I'll loosen it up over here, where we tightened it in the beginning. And now I'm ready to move the sled to tighten all of the screws. Now I can tighten this screw. Now I'll tighten this one. And I'll just keep going like this. When all of the linear guide screws have been tightened, we're ready to tighten up the remaining screws on this plate. Now we have to adjust both bearing blocks, and to do this we'll move the x-axis to the end like this. And now the bearing block will have found its natural resting position. Now I can tighten up these two outer screws. They are just the most easy ones to catch. Now I can move further to the other side. And again, I'll just let it rest in its natural position. I'll tighten up these screws. Now I can tighten up the two screws behind. And I'll do the same thing over there. Now we can install the cable chain brackets. Now we are moving on to page 7, and I'll start by installing this switch onto this switch bracket. Now I'll insert this screw around the T-nut. So now I'll insert the switch into the C-beam, and I just have to take note of what direction it points in. measurement according to the drawing. Now I'll fix the switch in its position. And we can put a piece of slot cover on the wire so that it's nice and safe down here. And it will exit through the end plate later. So now we'll install the top plate, and we just have to know which direction it points. In my case it's in this direction with the screws pointing this way. And again we have a fixed linear guide over here and a loose linear guide here. So we'll do up all of the fixed side screws. And then I'll do up one screw on the loose side. Now I can move this back and forth, and this has adjusted the distance between the two linear guides. Now I'll move it over here, and I'll loosen up this screw that I tightened in the beginning. Now I can tighten this. I'll move it, tighten, and I'll do the same thing for all of them. So now we'll do up the remaining screws over here on the previously loose side. Now the top plate has been installed and we can move on to the next step. So now we're ready for page 8, where we'll install the ball screw inside of the Z-axis. So we'll start out by fastening the bearing blocks to the end plates. And it's important to note that the counterballs stay on the outside here. We'll do the same thing for the other bearing block. Again, notice the counterballs. Now we're ready to put the ball screw inside of the Z-axis. So I'll just carefully slide it in like this, and I'll just angle the ball nut like this. And in case I have a switch, I'll put it through this hole for the cable. Now I'll start fastening the end plates to the CD. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. Now I'm ready to attach the ball nut bracket here to the top plate. We'll align it the same way as we did with the x-axis. So now I'll move it all the way to this end. I can tighten up these screws. Then I'll move it to the other end and do the same. Now I can tighten the remaining screws. So we are moving on to page 9, and as you saw earlier, we forgot to put the T-nuts in here. So we have put some spring-loaded T-nuts in your kit if you forgot to do the same. So you can now slide the spring-loaded T-nuts in here, so you don't have to disassemble all of this. So now I'll put the cable chain up. You of course need to flip the end like it says in the manual, and you can also see the links in the manual. Now I'll just start putting this in. And I'll find this lower mounting point by moving the axis all the way to the end, like this. Now the cable chain should have some extra slack, so I'll just move it a bit towards the right here. Now I can tighten it up. And I'll do the same thing for the y-axis. And again, I'll move the y-axis all the way to the front of the machine. And in this position, again, the cable chain should have some slack. Now we'll move on to mounting the Z-axis. So for page 10 we'll start out by installing the Z-axis motor. So I'll install the coupler. I'll just move it a few millimeters above the tension nut. Now I can take the motor and insert these screws. Then I'll insert the spacers. Now I can put the motor onto the coupler. Now I'll start tightening the screws. Now I can tighten the coupler. Now I can move on to the X-axis motor. So again, I'll insert the screws like this. Now I'll put the coupler on. Now I can install the motor. And finally, I'll tighten the coupler. Now we're ready to put the gearbox plates onto the side plates. Now I'll put the gearbox onto the gearbox plate. At this point we can loosen these screws again. Now we can push the gearbox up while moving the axis. So we can now find the correct position for this gearbox. And just while pushing up lightly, I'll tighten these screws. Now I'll install the other gearbox on the other side. So now I'm ready to install the motors. And to tighten the coupler inside of the gearbox, we just have to remove this little cover. And then we can turn or move the axis until the coupler turns in front of the hole. Now the motor has been properly connected, and we'll do the other side. So we have now finished up the machine with the wiring, and we are now ready to show it to you. So we are starting up here by the Z-axis. We have the Z-axis switch running inside of the C-beam and the wire exiting up here, and it terminates in a plug up here, and also the motor wire terminates in a plug, and then we run 2 of the black wires from here on out, and we just like to zip tie it up here, and then we run it loosely into the cable chain, and it runs through the cable chain and meets with all of the other cables down here. Now we'll go to the other side of the X-axis. Over here we have the X-axis switch, which terminates in a plug right here, goes through the cable binder and then into the C-beam. And we also have the motor down here, which also terminates in a plug and goes into the C-beam like the switch wire. And on the other side of the X-axis the wires come out here, and then they meet most of the other wires down here. And likewise, as with the other side, both the 2 motors here terminate in switches and then meet up with the other wires on the back side here. And on the back here we made a special bracket to guide the wires nicely into the cable chain. So underneath this bracket the wires are held with zip ties, and then they go into the cable chain, and we had to do this because otherwise the X-axis plate would foul the wires when it went all the way in this direction. So now all of the wires for our machine go through the cable chain all the way to the back of the machine and through these cable ties, and they end up in a nice neat bunch here. But we also have 1 extra wire for the Y-axis switch. This one goes into the C-beam and lays here with the slot cover and ends over here by the switch. If you're using a 3 meter long machine, then you will need to use the green plug over here, and then you will just run a black wire all the way to the end.
Thank you, Rasmus, for taking us through this complex build. I really enjoyed watching and seeing your work, and I hope all of you guys that will be assembling this machine will find it very useful to use the video alongside with the written documentation. If you like the content of this video and also would like to follow what we do, you can subscribe below. And then please help us spread the rumor about our different Piranha machines if you like them, and you also would like to share that with your friends and buddies. Thank you very much. Have a great day.